Hi everybody, my name's EFransen. This is Foxy. She likes to be included in things, so she's going to be on my lap during this. Hope you don't mind. You may hear some puppy jingles. So, talking about the developmental systems approach, in a general terms, the developmental systems approach states that environmental factors can influence change and produce results that may vary among children or between children depending on that child's background. So, for example, this would include biological factors, so where you're located, terrain, access to cities close by, farms, etc. Individual and social interactions, so peer group interactions, interactions with parents, interactions with teachers. Physical environments as well, so what type of home you may live in, whether or not you're sharing a room with a sibling, if you have pets, if you don't have pets, is the house clean, etc. And then lastly, the two factors that I haven't discussed yet are culture and time. And culture would be fairly significant. As we know, all of our cultures are very different across the world. So, for example, in American culture, something we value is hard work, sometimes to a fault, whereas in many Western European cultures, it's not that there's a lack of hard work, it's that there's more of a work-life balance. So that can affect developmental changes as well. And of course, time. When are things happening within a scheme of one presidential term? Cultural factors and time, I think, probably intertwine, as well as if you have a sibling being born, when is that child being born in the other child's developmental stage, etc. So this can also include, I think, varying views on men and women in different cultures. For example, if you are living in a culture where women are suppressed, women are feel oppressed, then that may cause you to either become more silent as a result or become far more outspoken and challenge the norms. But I guess that could probably be said for a lot of cultures. In America, we tend to be more outspoken about things that displease us, but that's not necessarily the culture in other countries, in other continents. Also, I think interactions with parents and teachers can really result in significant changes, particularly when we're talking about, I think, teachers. Teachers spend so much of their time with children. Children spend so much of their time with their teachers. If you have a teacher that is coming in with an open, positive attitude, and I'm a teacher, so I'm saying this out of personal experience, that can carry over into a child's life in a positive way. But if you have a teacher with a significant influence over a child's life who maybe has some frustrations with their own career or doesn't feel like they're spending enough time with their own children, that can also impact a child to make them feel like maybe they're not enough or they're lacking in some way. So those are just my insights. And as far as the Bronfenbrenner system goes, let me flip back to my notes for a second. The Bronfenbrenner system specifically says that a child's development is molded by environmental dispositions and environmental influence. So in other words, ecology in general. And this consists of 5 systems. The microsystem interacts with the mesosystem. The mesosystem then interacts with the exosystem. Exosystem with macrosystem, and then finally macrosystem with chronosystem, which of course has to do with time. So we're talking about the smallest sphere of influence. That would be the microsystem. And those are the interactions between a child and their immediate surroundings. So again, a child and a teacher, maybe a child and his or her friends, child and pets, siblings, anything like that. And the interesting thing that he says about these interactions that I very much think is true is that these interactions are totally dependent on both parties and their own development over time. So it's not just the person in question that needs to be studied, it's that person's friends and that person's teachers, etc., that you would need to get more of a detailed insight into in order to understand the party that we're discussing currently. The mesosystem is the interactions between the microsystem and any relations. So that would be parents, school life, learning. Learning is transferred to the home. So saying working well with teachers at home and then parents reinforcing that when the child gets home. So it's ways in which the child takes things that they've learned in other situations and applies it to current situation, applies it in other situations. Then the exosystem has to do with social changes, that don't immediately include the children. So that could mean changes in a parent's job, if they're spending more time at work, or maybe you're making less money at work. That can affect a child's upbringing, affect their attitudes. Also, any kinds of community services that are available. And that can mean anything from playgrounds to parks, even as far as free, therapy, those sorts of things. If a child feels like they are able to connect in their community and able to get the support they need in their community. Then the macro system, the fourth system, has to do with cultural values, laws, and customs. And this can have a great deal to do with childcare. What are the requirements for childcare in individual states, countries, etc.? What are the requirements of that child's religion and the parent's religion? What do laws allow and not allow for both children and adults? If a country has more loose laws surrounding things like transportation. If both men and women can drive, of course, that's a significant factor in helping make sure that a child has transportation when and where they need it. In some countries where women are not allowed to drive, that could significantly hinder both the parents' and children's ability to commit to extracurricular activities, etc. And then finally, the Chronos system, the last system in the Bronfenbrenner model, says that there's a continuous influence of time on all of these other subsystems. So that means that, let's say a child has a new sibling born. The way that the child relates to that sibling and the way that the child develops from that point forward would largely have to do with the point in their own development in which the new sibling is born. For example, I had a friend in high school who had a younger sibling who was born when she was 16. And because of that, she largely ended up filling a very parental role for that child. She was able to drive. She was able to help with transportation. And she had a sister who was a bit younger, but they were both kind of able to help out with babysitting, etc. So my friend who was 16, that was a major change in her life and affected her development moving forward because she eventually had to grow up pretty quickly. And I think you could always also make the same comparison if children are born fairly close apart, or close together, there are many activities that they would be able to do together, and many learning environments that they would be able to experience together, maybe even have some of the same friends, in which case the siblings may be closer emotionally as they're growing up together. Hopefully that all made sense. And then the Gottlieb probabilistic epigenesis says that there is an actual change in genetic makeup as a result of environmental influences. So in other words, as genetic activity is changing, neural activity may also be changing. Behavior may also be changing as neural activity is changing, etc. Environments may be changing as genetic activity is changing, and then in individual development as well. So all of these things are kind of moving parts. All of these things can be changing and affecting these other categories that we're talking about here all at the same time. It's not necessarily a step-by-step process where one consideration affects the next. They all need to be taken account as if they are all, again, moving at the same time. So I think as far as relationships are concerned, in particular, this model would say that those relationships with other people, with environments, with yourself, are probably changing indefinitely. It's not necessarily one thing leads to another. It's that they're all influencing each other at the same time. So that makes it difficult to decide what maybe the main factor in a child's changing development may be. It's many factors that should be considered at once. And then, sorry, lost my notes here. This interdisciplinary approach, I think, makes perfect sense when you're studying something like this, because in order to study a child's development at full, you can't just rely upon psychology. You also have to be taking into account, again, genetics. So we would need to have geneticists involved, testing genetics over time, as well as doctors who would be monitoring a child's changes temperamentally, and then also medically if anything significant's changed or things staying mostly the same. That's important as well. Even involving things like behavioral cognitive therapists, community service workers. We have a disturbance of the Foxy here, excuse me. And the teachers as well, who would be monitoring the students' progress outside the home. And in that way, I feel like that could be a practical application for some of these theories. I'm sorry. Siri thought I called her. So teachers could pretty easily monitor a student's activity at home and send maybe monthly progress reports home to parents, and that would allow parents a little bit more frequent insight into any significant changes in school environment. Yeah, that could mean anything from changes in friendships, negative changes as well as positive changes, changes in enthusiasm. And then, of course, the parents would be able to report back to the teachers in a similar fashion. These are the things we've noticed at home. These are some of the things that are overlapping. These are the things that we're not seeing at home at all that you're seeing in the classroom. And then at that point, if there are significant differences between what's happening at home and what's happening in school, or even if what's happening at home is causing trouble in school, then maybe you head to the more medical approach and speak to doctors, therapists, etc. And that's where that interdisciplinary approach would come in and be very useful. So that's my take on all of this stuff. I hope that wasn't too long, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks.